Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us on Daybreak right here on Trust TV. Right now, it's time for us to take a look at the front pages of the newspapers to find out what's making the headlines this morning. Start with Daily Trust newspaper, and it comes with this major story on the front page. That is the major headline: How next government can reposition Nigeria's oil industry, and that is according to experts. And we have riders here that says separate president from petroleum minister. That's from Professor Iledare, and regulatory clarity necessary. Prioritize competence, and we need to build local capacity, according to an economist. Now, these are the writers supporting the major story on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper. And the pictorial is about children celebrating Christmas at the Millennium Park in Abuja, trying to have as much fun as possible, despite the current challenges. Bad weather triggers flight cancellations as NCAA alerts pilots. Now, that's the story on page 19. And the news belt at the bottom of the page there reads, Don't be willing tools for politicians, Air Chief warns officers. Son sets up father's kidnap of 4.3 million naira in Kwara. Details of that can be found on page 16. And Tinubu, Uzodinma, others eulogize Ganduje at 73. Moving towards the top of the front page, below the masthead now, 14 killed in Bauchi, Kaduna, Ogun auto accidents. And I will be far away from Abuja after May 29th. That's according to the President, Buhari. Christmas, Oshibajo, Obi, governors send messages of hope and relief. Details of that can be found on page 3. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
Now we move on to the leadership newspaper, and on the top of the page, it has a story that says Oshibanjo preaches mercy, grace at Christmas. Details of that story can be found on page 6. And then Kuka to PMB, you are leaving Nigeria more vulnerable, corrupt. And then below the masthead, Nigeria missing in 12 most advanced African countries list. And below that, poverty, Serap sues Buhari over social investment and social intervention programs. Details of that story can be found on page 7 of Leadership newspaper. Then by the left, top terrorist commanders Maimusari, Bakura, 100 others killed in Borno. 6 die, 16 injured in Bauchi crash. And just below that, NDLEA intercepts Colorado cannabis juice consignment. Details of that is on page 12. And then the major story, 60 days to 2023 polls, INEC offices fortified with heavy security. And then the story has some riders. Security operatives guard commissions facilities nationwide. Arsonists burn 500 generating sites in Anambra. CSOs task government on security as INEC begs voters to collect PVCs. That is the major story on the front page of Leadership this morning, and details of that story could be found in page 4 of the paper. And the pictorial there shows Apostolic Faith Church Choir performing the orchestra during a Christmas concert in Lagos yesterday. And that's that for Leadership this morning.
Next, we'll take a look at The Nation newspaper and the major story. Experts X-ray Tinubu's plan on exchange rates subsidy. And that is the major story on the front page of The Nation newspaper. And it comes with a rider here that says unified rate will support growth, says Rewani, and local refineries must work. Still talking politics, G5's struggle beyond 2023 is another story on the front page of The Nation newspaper. And MDA's lawmakers behind delay in budget passage. At the very bottom of the page there, Saraki dynasty collapsed after 2019 election, says Abdulrazak, APC candidate. And now moving towards the top of the front page below the masthead, 9 dead, 21 injured in road accidents, 4 Ondo State students abducted. At the very top of the front page there, Oshibajo, governors to Nigerians, let's unite. And Muslims pray with Christians in church. Cleric challenges politicians. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of The Nation newspaper this morning.
And the Punch, it has a major story talking about PDP APC clash as Kuka slams Buhari. And the story has some bullets there. We bear scars, deep sorrow. Our children are still in forest, says Kuka. Cleric statement ungodly, not objective. Buhari deserves credit, says APC. And PDP backs Kuka, lampoons APC, says everything Buhari did was wrong. And on the very top of the page, fuel scarcity, NNPC marketers to begin mass supply. Details of that story is on page 19. And Nigeria missed 2022 poverty reduction target, according to the World Bank. And then lastly, on that row, there is only 5.4% irrigated farmland in Nigeria, according to the federal government. And below that, just by the side of the masthead, FG plans tax waiver suspension for rural farms. And that's detail of that story, so on page 20. And at the bottom of the page, double registration defaulters won't be disenfranchised, says INEC. Woman exhumes ex-husband's corpse, fights son over property. This is story with details on page 4 and 5. And lastly, on the front page of Punch newspaper this morning, pandemonium as policeman kills Lagos female lawyer. Details of that story is on page 6 of the paper. And well, that's it. And it has a similar picture also with that of leadership of the Christmas celebration in Lagos.
Next, we'll take a look at Nigerian News Direct, and it comes with this major story on the front page. Enough airstrikes kills over 100 terrorists in one day, and that's according to the spokesman. And the writer here that says terrorist kingpins Khalid Tukur, Mai Musari, Bakura Jega neutralized, and details of that can be found on page 21. Abiodun acknowledges Nigeria's challenges, says better days ahead, is another story on the front page of Nigerian News Direct. And talking about the war on drugs now, NDLEA intercepts Colorado cannabis juice consignments at Lagos Airport and Seaport. Now moving towards the top of the front page, right above the masthead, used vehicles, Oyetola is not in possession of 11 vehicles, says aide. And you're a patriot, service-oriented leader Jonathan Hills Makinde at 55. EFCC wins 2022 Servicom Award as Best Parastatal for Service Delivery. That is another story on the front page of Nigeria News Direct. Now, these are the stories on the front page of Nigeria News Direct newspaper this morning.
Okay, the next is Business Day. We go with the Business Day, and the major story this morning talks about the major story on the Business Day talk about 6 major headwinds Nigerian farms faced in 2022, and it has it starts with the front page and continues inside, and some other details of that: rising input costs, supply chain disruptions, and how Japan Web disrupted workplaces in 2022. Details of that is on page 29. And how Russia-Ukraine war affected Nigeria's economy. By the side, Yuletide interstate transport fare doubles on fuel scarcity. Below that, Nigeria dangles oil blocks amid waning investor appetite. And at the bottom of that, Infracos failed to deliver telecom facilities 8 years after. Details of that story is on page 31, and that's the details of stories on the front page of Business Day this morning.
Next, we take a look at First News, and it comes with the story right at the top of the front page there. PDP group carpets Wike over attack on Secondus, says Rivers governor still smarting from his loss of PDP presidential ticket, VP slot. Still talking politics, below the masthead now. 2023 polls, Atiku will win at first ballot, says spokesman. And Peter Obi spends Christmas with Benue IDPs, gives them 3 million naira largesse for their maintenance. The major story on the front page of First News is on the Christmas, and it says Christmas homily. Again, Bishop Kuka flays Buhari, says you've made Nigerians more vulnerable, country now further divided. the false president's anti-corruption credentials and says menace of a new Leviathan nepotism further entrenched. Now, that's the major story on the front page of First News. After May 29th, I'll leave Abuja to avoid any issues, says Buhari, claims I have only one house in Daura to retire to. 9 killed, 22 injured in Bauchi, Lagos Christmas Day auto crashes. And that is also another story on the front page of First News. The news belt here has these stories. I'm talking about politics. 2023, arm yourself with PVC, Governor Autumn charges Nigerians. And Ikpeazu says G5 agitation beyond 2023 elections. Pray for peace, unity of Nigeria. Governor Inua charges Gombe intending Christian pilgrims. And Ebonyi governor sanctions APC for disobeying orders on campaign. Still on the front pages of First News newspaper, Shiite members attend Christmas church service in Kaduna. And PDP group carpets Wike over attack on Secondus, says River governor spotting from his loss of the VP presidential tickets. Christmas, Osinbajo implores mercy, grace for Nigeria. And finally, on the front page of First News newspaper, PDP to Nigerians, be hopeful, don't succumb to misery. Now, those are the major stories on the front page of the First News. And with that, we wrap up reeling out the headlines this morning on Daybreak. And of course, we will go into the newspaper review proper to actually examine some of these stories.
Exactly, the headlines. And with that, we have Mukhtar Suleiman, a communication expert and public affairs commentator, who will help us shed some light onto some of the major headlines. Good morning, Mukhtar, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. It's been quite a view.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Thank you. Merry Christmas. I don't know whose house we are coming for the
compliments of the season. Well, don't worry, we'll sort that out. But let's attend to the business of the day. Yeah, thank you very much. So now, looking at the oil industry, I know it's a behemoth. Now, every now and then you hear this and that. And front page of Daily Trust this morning talks about, experts talking about how to prioritize certain things, especially, issues of turning around the industry for the better, especially for the next government. What do you think is not working that has made, because we thought it was NNPC, they have done this unbundling. Of course, I know a lot of people are saying that it is still window dressing and all that. What is wrong,
I think the oil sector has a plethora of issues. One of it being that the over-reliance of the Nigerian economy on the oil sector to keep it afloat is one of the biggest problems that we have. And for a sector that we've relied so heavily on to generate most of our most of our IGR in the country, we have left it at a deplorable state because it's still sticking in that we still have to export the crude to go be refined outside and then still pay for transport to bring it back into the country. Something that we know fully well, that the raw materials, the raw resources are actually mined here in the country. So the extractive industry in its entirety in the country needs to actually look at how they can ensure that we keep production local as opposed to the international that we've actually maintained over the past years. Yes, we are looking forward to what Dangote's refinery will bring, but let's not forget that that's a private sector business. So at the end of the day, for most of the regulation and how it's going to operate, the man is going to decide that. And we all know how businesses work. They maximize profits as much as possible, because that is these are monies that have been pumped in. Will it be government regulation? We don't know how that is going to work yet. But owing to the fact that we have about 4 refineries that are inactive in the country, speaks very poorly of a country that relies on this particular produce to keep the economy afloat.
No,
it's
so
really bad.
You just talked about the private refinery that's coming on stream right now, and you talked about the situation whereby it's private sector driven, and of course it's driven by profits and the rest of it. So are we trading one monopoly for the other? We're leaving the NNPC that we used to control everything. Now we're going to this particular refinery because everybody seems to be talking about that. Once that refinery comes on stream, things will be different and all that. Are we trading one monopoly for another?
I don't think at the end of the day, when we say, oh, NNPC was doing basically nothing in terms of refining before in the first place. So what we are cutting off now is the moving it abroad maybe, and how much of that barrel per day can the Dangote refinery refine? That's another question that we need to actually ask and answer appropriately. So we still need to revamp the refineries we have in the country. And it's funny how we've looked past the fact that if Dangote could be bold enough to actually invest a lot of money in setting up a refinery, I might be wrong, let me put a disclaimer out there, but it's because business people do their research, ensure that there's profit making in this before they go in. So if Dangote will be so bold to pump in as much money as he has pumped in into a private refinery, you can imagine what he knows about the fact that our refineries are not going to work. Because if there's any hope or plan or strategy in place to ensure that those 4 refineries that are stayed are actually going to come on board, I don't think he would invest as much money as he has invested into setting up a private refinery. So we really need to check ourselves as a country, honestly, because there are certain things that government should have no business in. And I think I've said some of them here. For me, one of them is education, one of them is the transportation. These are private sector driven businesses that I don't mind if they are there, but for things like refinery, where we know that the dividends of it trickles down to the common of the common, government needs to step in and be at the vanguard of it. So I think we really need to look inwards properly as the next government is coming in. Hopefully their tactics, their strategies are going to be research driven, it's going to be evidence based, and not the absurd, ambiguous statements that we are used to.
Beyond refining, one issue on the front page of Business Day this morning, they said Nigeria dangles, oil blocks, and before investors who have less appetite now for. So beyond refining, even the crude oil itself, where do you see us? Especially as you said, we are largely a mono economy in which we depend on oil, and now the appetite for it is going down increasingly.
The funny thing about Nigeria, I don't know if it's sad, really, because I just came back from Bauchi yesterday, and it will be the first time in a long time I traveled for a journey that long by road. And as I was going in, we went through Jos before we got to Bauchi and all of that, and Jos prides itself as peace and tourism. I think there's something about tourism with Bauchi as well. And I could see the landscape, and all I could see in my head was how much money is just lying fallow in our country. I've had a rare privilege to travel around, and if you see how other governments in other countries are prioritizing most of those things, like how we pay money. For example, I'll give you an example. There's this place in Sharm el-Sheikh, for example, now in Egypt, where you go pay money. They call it Sinai. It's actually a mountain on its own, but then there's a way they carved it and made a restaurant out of it that overlooks the Nile. It is something ordinary, but they've made it extraordinary by just doing that. And so because of that, it's quite expensive to go eat there. And some of us will go there, we pay money, we go, we snap pictures and everything else. There's this place in Marrakesh, in the market. It's a market, a local market, where the restaurant was built, but very high, that overlooks, it's in the middle of the market, it overlooks the whole market. So, and the market comes alive at night. So there's this creative way they've actually made it. So we all go there, we pay for the window seats. The window seats are more expensive than the center of the restaurant. And now these are ideas. Dubai has oil as well, but they've also diversified. I think so it's crazy when you see what Nigeria is doing and how much we're actually mismanaging the excess resource that we have, the blessings that we have actually in this deplorable way, honestly. I'm actually hoping that the next person will be smart enough to know that there's a need. Pick one problem and solve it. There's a need to decentralize our mono economy and ensure that other aspects of the country are actually generating money to support the oil.
All right. Well, when you talk about Nigerian oil, it invariably links to the economy because that is the driving force behind it. It was Christmas yesterday. It was a celebration of Christmas, and prior to that, we kept on here. We get reports about how expensive things were in the market, inflation, and all that. And right now, we're looking at the papers, and every other newspaper carries a headline that Christmas celebrated. Some places very low key, but still the celebration went on. I mean, like the pictorial in front of Daily Trust newspaper shows us children at Millennium Park trying to have a good time despite the current struggles. Is this a testament to the resilience of Nigerians?
Yes, it is. Well, I think yesterday I made a joke with some of my friends. I said, be careful how you spend in December. Your next salary is on the 79th of January. Next salary is on the 79th of January. But Nigerians are quite like, we're a resilient lot, and we have this thing about ourselves, the can-do attitude, to ensure that we can actually keep pushing and keep doing what we need to do to keep smiles on our face and forget most of our problems, which is actually a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, because we are not angry enough yet, because we try as much as possible to smile through the troubles. If we don't, for the first time that we didn't want to smile through the troubles, that was when we had the NSAS protest in a way. So and that changed some things. That put the government on its toes. It sort of shook the administration, which is actually a good thing as well. So I don't know what to say about. One thing I can say though is that the world currently is facing inflation, not just Nigeria. We're not even having it as bad as other countries, and these are some developing countries actually. I know some places in the UK now have to shut down light power for a few days, so they are fluctuating it, they are rationing it in a manner of speak, and this is the first time for them, first time experience. A friend of mine in the UK was telling me that they shut down she has lived all her life in the UK, so they shut down their life for 48 hours every week. I was like, okay. That's fair.
That's fair. Exactly.
I was like, that's fair.
At least they will have a taste of it.
Yeah, I was like, okay, just 48 hours?
48 hours
okay.
in a week. I mean, that's fantastic.
That's fair. Yeah. But the thing is, I think the world is actually suffering that right now with the war going on in Ukraine, and that's creating like a snowball effect in different parts of the world. But the thing is that if you see how we are not getting it as bad still, it tells you how much of a resource we have as a country. And if it's properly managed, then we have all the markings to actually be one of the best countries in the world, honestly. Because if you look at how much has been stolen in Nigeria in the last 10 years, for example, and then you still see that the economy is still afloat. Government says there's no money, but still they'll still pay salaries. There's no money, but certain things are still going. So then if everything is properly managed, imagine how well we are actually going to be as a country.
But you see, every time this argument comes up now and we say that there's really high inflation in Nigeria, people are unable to buy basic necessities and all that, the counter argument is it is a global thing. Is that enough?
Well, I'm not really making a counter argument. Okay. I don't want it to come off that way. That I'm trying to say just because it's a global inflation, that's an excuse as to the current status of our economy. No. That's why I actually went further to say if our resources are properly managed, then we can actually do better than the way we are doing. But you cannot take away the fact that yes, there's global inflation currently. Every country is having it very difficult right now, and we just have to find a way to actually see how we can live through most of these issues.
Okay, away from economy and all that, coming back to the issue of election and the INEC offices that have been attacked. You know, INEC chairman every now and then comes out to say, oh, this will not distract us, this will not stop us from conducting election. But I'm just seeing the front page of leadership this morning that 500 generating sets are burnt in an office in either Anambra or Imo. So with this kind of real destruction, beavers, machines, essential materials needed for the election have been burned. And now INEC is even begging voters to come out and collect their PBCs. What do you make of that in terms of the conduct of the election? Isn't this a real threat to the election?
Two things I've always said. You see, most of these issues actually happen in the southeastern part of the country, and that's because of the existing grievance that we know that is actually prevailed there. But still, I've always said this to most of my southeastern counterparts. When you do things like that, you're disenfranchising your people. So it means that because democracy is a system of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, that means that the electioneering process must hold. You cannot have a legitimate government without having that election take place. So if that is the case, and that is the reality, not even an if, then you are destroying the way your people are supposed to, what your people are supposed to use to go and have a say for you.
To bargain.
At the ballot. You're bargaining chip. You're just throwing it away. That's one of my response to that. But secondly, another response I have to that is that the PVCs don't have chips. The PVCs don't have chips. They play no vital role in the 2023 elections, other than a means of identification. That's what it is. So if I register to vote, why can't I go with my international passport as a valid means of identification, where the beavers scans my face, shows that I'm in the system, then use my valid means of identification to corroborate that. Because that's what I think the PVCs currently are just a disenfranchising tool. Because a lot of people are losing their PVCs right now. So what's the alternative for them when the PVCs are not playing a vital role in them voting in the first place? So it's something that we really need to look into as a way to augment the current existing issues, if that is still possible for INEC. If it is not, then let's look forward to it in 2027. I think the PVC should go with the introduction of the beavers. It's not actually something that plays any key vital role. It's not an alternative way of voting. Another thing again, it's not an alternative way of voting. Because when you come with the PVC, it's not like they're sliding it into the beavers machine and then there's no technology there that it plays any role for. So I think we need to reevaluate our electioneering process, because like for me now, for example, I really don't want to say, really didn't want to say this, but I'm not going to specify the state anyway. I went to collect my PVC and they can't find it.
Okay.
I transferred from a state to another state and now they're looking for it. I was really angry about it, because you can't tell me that you can't find it anymore. So that means now you are disenfranchising me from voting. So that's a problem that we actually need to look into, because I don't see the need for us to keep using the PVCs anymore if with the introduction of the bimodal systems.
All right. Well, let's just stay in the southeast for a little bit. With all this disruption of INEC materials and offices and the rest of it, there is a real danger that elections might not actually hold. If this happens now going forward, and of course, we've always had this. The Southeast has always cried marginalization. We're not getting what we're supposed to get. If unfortunately elections do not hold there, is there a way back for the Southeast?
I don't know. I think actions have consequences. It's usually one of the philosophy I live by. Whatever you do, your actions or inactions, have consequences. It has ripple effects in how things flow. So if at the end of the day, the instability you are creating in your region does not allow your people to come out and come and speak for you at the polls, then that is something that you have to actually deal with on your own as a group of people. I think we need to stop mincing words and say things the way they are. It is actually unfair. That is illegal in its own sense. What you're doing is illegal in its own sense, because you're disenfranchising people. You are trying to thwart democracy. And if you say, oh, what you're clamoring for is your own country, let's look at how countries separate. You can't do it this way. You have to negotiate with the country. You can't live on grievance. And then I was discussing this with my friend the other day, and I said, okay, according to the Nigerian constitution, land is owned by the government. If you say you want to go and start your own country, you don't want to negotiate with the existing government, where will you go and set up your country? What land? On what land? When the sovereignty, part of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country is actually land as well. So these are basic common things. Even referendum, if you want to hold a referendum as to how you should leave the country and all of that, it still has to be negotiated and decided together collaboratively with the aggrieved party and the country they want to actually live from. So we can go into the whole dynamics of how countries separate, and that's a whole lengthy conversation of its own. But the point is just that I think that the Southeasterners needs to actually reevaluate whatever strategy they are using and ensure that galvanize people together. I don't know who your candidate is. Educate people on who they should go and vote for, but ensure that they go out and go and vote. That's very important.
Well, that's interesting. And still on elections, But this time around, as leadership reminded us this morning, it says 60 days to election.
Yes.
Now, so where is ding dong, you know? So where do you see the pendulum?
I think.
Or is it still too early to call? Because I think yesterday, that's the headline. They say it's still too close to call. I don't know.
Even on the day of the election, you'll be very arrogant to think you know who would win.
Wow.
There are so many dynamics in the electioneering process right now that are played, and we don't know where it's going to tilt toward. Honestly, you'll be very arrogant.
No, but there are elections that, weeks ahead or even months ahead.
Yes, but not this one. Not this one. Because this is the reason. This is where this is a new democracy. We're ushering in a new form of democracy where the old ways of doing things are meeting the newer ways of doing things. Follow the Osun State elections here and you get to see the difference. Most of the people who voted for Adeleke were between 18 to 35. Most of the people who came to about almost 50% of the people who came out to vote were from the urban settings, which is against the normal demographic of what we've seen about elections. How that's going to play on a larger scale at national level, we don't know yet. But still, like I said, there are so many dynamics playing, there are so many nuances coming, there are so many variables fighting each other for this election. And you, like I said again, you'd be very arrogant to assume that you can actually clearly, based on what we have now, clearly say this is who is going to win. We don't know yet, we don't know how it's going to come. But something I've always said here is one thing that we need to actually do is to check the unchecked grievances of the supporters of each of the candidates, because there are violent actors across all the candidates. That's something I noticed about the campaigns this period. So we need to actually check those things. Most of those candidates need to actually talk to their supporters to ensure that they can keep the peace, because at the end of the day, one person is going to win. We cannot have two presidents in the country. So how do we ensure that there's acceptability of the result? And that's where transparency of INEC comes in. The electronic transmission of results, nothing should happen to that website on that day of the elections. BVAS should work on a large scale. Even if there are going to be errors, it shouldn't be as much. How do you ensure that in places where there are no internet, what are the mechanisms to ensure that people can follow the process to where there's internet and ensure the transmission before anything else, so that nothing changes? Because we know that sometimes whenever election rigging wants to happen is when they are moving from polling units to rec centers. So how do we ensure that transparency of that process so that there's acceptability of the result at the end of the day? When people see it clearly that, oh, I have lost this election, and that way nobody can actually come out and want to stir up trouble. It's why the Osun State elections, however, there is a court case and all of that, but it's not as before, where you see the whole strong opposition, or there's this tall tales coming out about how the election went. But it was so clear as day that election was fair and free. So we're hoping for the same thing on a national level.
Okay.
All right. Well,
thank you very much. I think with that, you wanted to ask something, but because the time is against us.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar Suleiman, for coming here today, despite being a Boxing Day. And we hope we will still catch up with the remaining fun of the season, and we wish you a very pleasant week.
Thank you very much.
So with that, we take a quick break. We'll come back at the top of the hour for the second segment of Daybreak. Do stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.